Good morning. I don't know. Actually, where you are, Octavian, it's not morning anymore.
No, it's not morning, it's afternoon. It's 5 p.m.
You lucky guys. You're closer to the weekend than I am.
That's true.
Right? It is. So, yeah. So, wow, I haven't done this in a while. This is, I think, the longest break we've done with online sessions. Because basically, Octavian, it's just you and I, everybody on vacation on boats and parks, and it's just us here. So yeah, so the entire July we haven't done anything. So it's so nice to be with you today. So I'm with Octavian Pilati. Good afternoon. How are you doing?
Good, good. Means as you just mentioned, summer could be a bit quieter, but it's getting quiet slowly. So I'll hopefully be enjoying it more in August.
And you are where in the world now?
I'm in Vienna.
Vienna. Very nice. So, of course, this is being recorded and we'll put it online later on for those who registered and couldn't join us or those who want to check it out later on. So, just a couple of words about you. I mean, obviously, we're going to talk about crisis and dealing with that and everything around that. And you will be also joining us in London, I believe, in later
That's
this
correct.
year, annual conference in London. And a couple of words about you. So you're an Austrian entrepreneur with family history dating back to the year 1000, the family. You spent your young adult years gaining a profound knowledge in the technical field. In 2015, the family business suddenly slid into a major crisis, and you decided to take over the crisis management. Now you're basically sharing your experience and knowledge about family businesses, personal development, crisis, fraud, and a lot more with other families. And throughout my years of doing this, which are, I don't know, 15 years of doing family office discussions, I've met several families that are consultants, advisors in different levels. I think I haven't seen too much crisis management, but like our friends from Canada, Danielle Saputo and Patricia Saputo, are both consulting families on different issues. The Strauss family, a very famous family from Israel, she's a doctor on family business. But really, crisis, which is probably the toughest point, the most sensitive one, I haven't seen too many, but it's very different when you got somebody who's coming from a family and witnessed it on his flesh. And I think another point, we'll talk about it soon, that many families don't support when family members coming out talking about what happened. And we'll talk about that as well. So it's very nice that you're doing it anyway, because you're helping others. And again, unlike professional consultants that are great, I think there's a different layer, a different dimension when you come from the family itself and you witnessed it on your flesh and blood. It's different. Crisis obviously is a permanent threat to any organization. It comes at a certain point. Wealth, relationship, and reputation are put at risk. So what we're talking about today, what does it mean for a family when their business enters a crisis? And by the way, crisis can come from many angles. We're doing the Chicago conference, for instance, and one of our friends there is the Crown family, which is a major known family in Chicago. And sadly, the one of the brothers who really ran everything died at a car accident, basically a month ago. And it's not just crisis that comes from arguments. It's crisis that comes because life suddenly puts you in different places. So we're going to talk about lots of interesting issues. So first of all, happy to have you.
Thank you for having me as well. I hope the audience is going to take a few things home to inspire them and help themselves with.
So I guess maybe just before we dive into some questions that I have here, maybe a little bit about yourself, about your family business.
Yeah, Sure. So you mentioned that our family goes back to the year 1000. That's not the Pilati family. Pilati, we are out of Eastern Germany. Now it's Poland, so Silesia. But where our estates and the wealth comes from is the Kefenhüller family in Austria. It's one of the Austrian minor princely houses, or was. Aristocracy has been abolished in Austria in the revolution. But we started off in the year 1000, or that's the first time the name comes up in any documentation. So we have always been mostly in forestry and agriculture. And, when back in the day when it was still a monarchy, we were also very heavy in the military, the clergy, and politics, of course. And I myself studied mechanical engineering and went to boarding school in the UK. And since 2014, I've been doing business and been thrown into the business world rather surprisingly and quickly, because back then I was 25, I believe, when the whole crisis kicked off for us. So that's me in a nutshell, I guess.
And how was it to grow up in a family like that with heritage and family business? And when you and when in your generation, where was the family business? In which stage? What were you guys doing?
Well, so what is it like to grow up with such a legacy? It's at one side, it's a little humbling when you look back at history and see all the achievements of your forebearers, and that can be pressuring. Sometimes it's rather confusing. One of my favorite examples is I was 5 years old and I was just stumbling around in our garden, and one of the farmers who was tending to some of our fields came by to meet my dad. And he was my grandmother's generation. So in German language, you have a polite form and an impolite form speaking to each other. And he was using the polite form and the aristocratic title and everything. And I was just standing there being confused because you use impolite form with children usually. So it was very strange. So it's you have this legacy to look at, and it can be a treasure of knowledge of past experiences, but it's also a pressure. And you grow up in the public eye, as to speak. People know you before you know them, kind of thing, and that can be tricky to navigate as well. And back then, we were mainly in forestry. So with the revolution in Austria, aristocracy lost its political functions and a lot of power. So what was left were mainly the estates. And we used to be heavy investors in industries, but due to World War One and then again World War Two, we lost basically all the investments in those spaces because Austria's industry hub was the Czech Republic. And after World War One, they split off, and then after World War Two, they became a part of the UdSSR. So that's in both cases we lost those investments. So we were left with mainly forestry and agriculture. And the family, we didn't have a family office or one big family business. We ran a cooperative where every family member with their estates joined the cooperative, and we shared employees and office space and things like that. So that was the structure of the family business.
And I assume at that point you guys had a big family, right? So many generations. How many people were involved?
Well, not that many as you would think, because for 900 plus years, the succession was very easy in the family. The oldest was trained to take over and basically got the estates. The second oldest son would typically be sent to the military. The third oldest son would enter the clergy. And then any sons after that could choose a bit more freely what they would be doing. So that was like standard practice. And girls would have to marry. So and since World War II, legislation in Austria has changed. So there's like a minimum share every child has to receive of the inheritance, and then that's when the family started to do things differently, cut it up. Some family members sold their estates, and those who chose to stick together went in that cooperative, and some decided to go on their own. So that been a bit more freely for the last 3 generations, really.
What is it about the second going to the army? Isn't it like, hey guys, I actually want to work with you guys and have fun in the pool rather than go to the army, guys? Just because I'm second.
Yeah.
Sounds to me like being second is not the best kind of no.
Well, back then, with the estate and with the title, the main title were also usually political functions. So you had to be doing politics and manage estate management. Those things were taught to you at a young age. And then who ran the country back in a monarchy? Politics, the army, and the church. So you try to position yourself as a family in every 3 of those powerhouses, as to speak.
Now, I'm being asked, and we're getting there. Somebody's asking here, what was the crisis you keep referring to? We're getting there.
Yeah.
So, we're learning about the family and how it went. And so you ended up learning about crisis management at a young age, which leads us to what people are asking. So what was the crisis? What happened? So
yeah. So my dad invested in a company in Austria, which was running teak plantations in Costa Rica. And we were an asset-heavy family, but not very cash-heavy. So forestry in Austria has like a 1.5% yield on the asset value, which is very low. So what my dad did is he offered our estates as collateral for this company to take on a bank loan, and we were back-to-back secured with a mortgage in Costa Rica on the land there. And it was an Austrian company running these plantations over in Costa Rica. So that's what the investment was. So rather risky, because we basically used our main business, everything to provide this collateral. And we received a fee for this, which doubled our yield on paper, at least, for our operation. And everything was going well. My dad was also in the board of advisors and things like that. And so he did the first tranche in 2009, later in 2011, until about 2014, the CEO was always one of the founders. And in 2014, they had an external CEO for the first time. And they ran out of liquidity, so he had to try and find some new liquidity. And he did a bit of digging into the company books and everything. And basically in the annual general meeting that took place in that year, later in the year, he went on stage and announced that he had discovered embezzlement and that the books were cooked, as you would say, and things like that. So it was a bit of a surprise. We got an inkling before that things aren't running very well, but that it is on this scale as it was a total surprise. So the plantations were on paper over-evaluated by a factor of 7. So that was So that was I call it due to the internationals. It was been an international case with investors in Austria losing their money, but the assets were in Costa Rica. So in the end, no charges were pressed for anything, because Costa Rica and Austria, they don't cooperate. So the Costa Ricans basically said, well, it's a bunch of Austrians defrauding Austrians, we don't care. And the Austrians said, well, the whole thing is about Costa Rican assets, we can't really evaluate that. So both the investigations were closed without any charges being pressed. So in these cases, it's difficult to say it was a fraud, but at least the CEO back then named it as such. And that's when the whole, crisis management kicked off in that sense. In parallel, though, we were also experiencing a sort of a crisis within the family, which was happening a few years before, because we were in discussions about succession and couldn't really find an agreement on how that would look like between my half brother and me and things like that. So I always like to say we had a latent crisis slowly coming up in the family, and then we had this sudden business crisis adding on top of that. So yeah, that's what we experienced back then.
And by the way, just wondering, the embezzlement, who did they think was behind that? Not that it mattered, it happened, and you guys need to deal with it. But what was the thought? Who was behind it? Somebody stole money? Somebody just showed stupid numbers to get away with other stuff, or what?
I think so. I mean, due to us experiencing this, I got into the topic of fraud, and it's because I got interested to see, okay, how can you mitigate this? Don't want to have this happen again, and things like that. And most fraud cases kind of develop. People don't come out and say, okay, I'm going to now embezzle a lot of money. It kind of, develops. And I think that's a case where it kind of developed into a fraud, and we will over-evaluate it to get a bit more money so we can run the operation longer, etc., etc. But it just got to a point with lots of different things, like they had more employees on paper than they really existed. So the CEOs, it seems, drew out some money out of the operation with these salaries that didn't exist. In Costa Rica, it's a common practice for some entrepreneurs. There's a lot of people who want employment just to have Social Security. And so you have a deal with them where you say, I will employ you for your Social Security, but the rest of the money that I send you, you're going to forward to me on my private account. It's not an unusual case over there. So that was done, for example. And the big thing was the overvaluation, really. Which they all, and I had conversations with them, they really believed it would all work out in the end, because in forestry, the price you get for timber is an S-curve with the age of the wood. And if you can keep going long enough, you will get very good prices for your timber. That's what they were speculating, and they ran out of money before even getting there.
Wow. So you're dealing with two different crises, two different pressure kinds of pressure. One is the company that's in a difficult situation, and the second one with your brother about inheritance, your half brother about inheritance. So it's two issues at the same time. So how did that play out?
Well, first of all, with the inheritance issue, we initially decided, we agreed to disagree and say, all right, this is not a topic we can resolve right now. We have the other thing to sort out first. So initially, the family worked together and looked at things. In the initial phase, I was kept out the loop because I was still a student. What I did was I got a job first thing, because I was like, okay, if I need some financial stability of my own in case the thing goes down the drain. And so yeah, the succession issue came up a little towards the end of the crisis again, and we haven't resolved it yet. It's still an ongoing issue. We are, let's say, communication and trust has broken down a little bit within the family. So this is something where we need to mend and repair, and that's going to take a while.
And the company crisis, what happened with that?
Well, initially, the end result was liquidation. We had to sell the company, or we decided to sell the company because financially that was the best solution at the time. Thinking back on it, there could have been some other possible ways to solve it, where we could have kept the company, but there's some specific knowledge in many different fields that we didn't have. So these options we didn't know about them, for example. And initially, my father was doing the crisis management with advice from the rest of the family. And there was a lot of players, as my brother, his wife, his mother, and my mother, and kind of the family would meet regularly discussing things. And I was mainly involved at the start as translator, because the other investors in the company either spoke only German or Italian. I speak not German, English or Italian. And I speak both these languages, and my dad only speaks German, really. So I would go along just to the meetings to help him with the language barrier there. And later in 2000, like in the middle of 2015, the crisis management moved over to me, which was a bit sudden and surprising, because I still remember it today. I was sitting in Munich in a beer garden with my colleagues, because the headquarters was in Munich from the company I worked for, and we would go there every month. And I get a call from our lawyer who when I picked up, I was like, why is he calling me? And he asked me if I had read the email. I was like, okay, what email are you talking about? He's like, read it and call me again afterwards. So I opened my phone and looked at my Gmail account, and my dad had written an email that he and my brother will be going on a holiday for 2 weeks, and that they're not reachable in this time. And if there's any questions from anyone, they can contact his second son, and he put my contact details in the email. So the lawyer was a bit surprised. The other investors and the CEO of the company were surprised. And as you can imagine, most people see this as a great opportunity to get something from you when you are young and have no idea what you're doing. Yeah. So those 2 weeks were basically our lawyer and I agreed that I would say no and maybe to anything I was asked without making a decision, just to make sure that nothing goes wrong in that time. So that's what we did. And when my brother came back, we had a meeting with our lawyer, and I just expected this to be a kind of a debrief where we'd get my dad up to speed, and I would then things would continue as they did before. But in that meeting, surprisingly, our lawyer suggested to my dad that the crisis management should go over to me. I'm younger, I have more energy, I'm based in Vienna. My dad was out of the States, and my brother had his own company, so he couldn't and didn't want to take care of the crisis management. And so, yeah, in that meeting, my dad then decided that's what we're going to do. And that's when I started managing the crisis.
And by the way, why would your father just disappear for 2 weeks with his son and throw it all on you without preparation?
Well,
Just
yeah, it's a good question. Well, he needed a break. They both needed a break from it was rather stressful and overwhelming, because we were not prepared at all for this, not at all. And I think he just trusted that due to me translating, I was in the loop enough to understand what's going on. And I mean, I wouldn't go to any of the meetings with other lawyers, so it should work out. I think that was the rationale behind it.
But he could have talked with you before and tell you, oh, by the way.
Yeah, it's typically my dad.
And then how old were you then? You were like,
I was 20. I need to think back. Wait, 20, I just turned 26.
wow. So very early, suddenly this whole mess is on you, and you need to try and resolve it. So just before we continue, let's see some other remarks of people. People write some remarks. Usually develops slowly. Yeah. So someone is asking, during that time, how did you manage to motivate employees, and most importantly, motivate yourself to wake up every day with such crisis on your head?
Well, it's a good question. It definitely was a roller coaster with lots of up and downs. Well, initially, for the first few months, I had a lot of motivation, because I was really honored to be put in this position. It was like the first, let's say, meaningful job that I've ever had, where I said, okay, I have some I have a little bit of decision-making power. It's an interesting thing. I haven't done this before. There was lots of for me to learn. So that was sustaining me for a while. But it got too much at some point. So I was writing my master's thesis. I had my job and I was doing the crisis management. I kept that up for 6 months, which in hindsight was a very stupid idea. Should have quit the job or writing my thesis or something. And then after 6 months, I was like, okay, this can't carry on. And I quit the job and I put my studies on ice because I was still studying. And there were regular setbacks, different things from the plan that I had to put together with our advisors not being accepted by the family or by my father, and we had to start again, or something new happening that basically screwed everything up we had worked on. I think I had this mission that I said I will save the family business, which was kind of like my North Star that kept me going. And then, I started reading personal development books and watching videos on this stuff because I was like, okay, I need to manage this better. How can I get more out of myself and things like that. But really, I think that mission I put myself to, that's what kept me going for most of the time and managed to get me up. And with the employees, some of them had been working for us for 30 years. Our forest engineer went straight out of school to work for us. So we just told them, look, we don't know what will happen. We need you guys. Business can't work without you guys. So we're not going to throw you out. We did speak to some of our employees about entering retirement a little earlier because, when someone's been worked for you for 30 years, you have to pay by law different salaries than if a new guy comes in. And we had our cousins who were in the cooperative with, and we had a contract in the cooperative, which made restructuring for us difficult because I always needed them to sign off on things, and we had some inter-family disputes coming up. So I guess the employee part, they just had the trust that whatever we would do and whatever solution we would come up with, that we would not forget about them in it.
How many employees did you have?
Huh?
How many employees
in the forestry business itself, we had 3.
And when you say you sold the business, you sold everything or just the forestry or?
Yeah, so what I probably didn't say, we also had 2 legacy buildings, our palace and the castle. There we in both places we ran a private museum, so we had some employees there as well. So the legacy buildings were handed over to me, and the forestry operation we sold completely. And the new owners took on our employees.
And the legacy buildings are still owned by the family?
I still own the castle. I sold the palace last year. So that was planned. I said, okay, we ideally we would have sold the palace with the forest land, but people who want to buy forest land don't necessarily want to buy a palace, and vice versa. And we had lots of potential buyers who said, well, I take the palace off your hands, but I would deduct money for taking it on. And I was like, why? There's people who would pay money to have a palace. So, and in Austria, there's there's a pension sale in tax law. So if you are above 60 years old and you sell your company, it's a pension sale, which means they only charge half the tax. So we kind of had to hand over the historic buildings so we could use the pension tax. So that's how we solved it. And yeah, the castle is still owned by the family, by me, but the other legacy building had to go, or didn't have to. I decided it's time to let go of it.
And why, when all of that was happening, or maybe didn't you guys go to somebody like you, a crisis manager, somebody who's professional, to solve both the issues within the family and both the crisis management in the company? Or maybe you have?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I mean, the standard companies that you get suggested you go to is the big 5, for example. Those we didn't think we needed them because we know how to run a forestry business. They don't really know how it works. I mean, there's probably some specific advisors for that. And we should have gone to some professionals for maybe a restructuring plan. And crisis management professionals wasn't at all on our radar. I don't think we thought about it. And I think my family has a culture of very much we deal with our things ourselves. And that's a bit of an issue. We're not really, doesn't come to mind to look for outside help. It's always, okay, lawyers and tax advisors, yes, you need them, those you work with, but otherwise it's more of we handle things ourselves. And yeah, not in hindsight, not probably the best mindset to have.
Somebody's asking, did your lawyer help you actually? Who was the most influential in getting out of crisis?
There is, so one of my, it's funny, a guy I played rugby with while I was a student, he's a fraud specialist. So he called me, actually, no, we met in a wedding during the crisis. He said, come to my office on Monday, I can help you. And back then I remember I was like, another one of my friends who thinks he can help me. And I've had meetings with some friends who then looked at our balance sheet together. And so I was kind of like, okay, but that in that case, it was very, very helpful. And then there came a point, especially due to his influence, where he said, look, you have people in your network, you have a good network, ask for help. Because my family said, we're not going to talk to anyone about this problem. We don't have a problem to the outside. But everybody knew anyway what was going on, because newspapers writing about it, and it's not. So I ended up with 3 mentors out of our network, also three guys who are also aristocracy, or the roots are in aristocracy, and they've been in banking and estate management, and one of them actually was is a crisis manager. So those 3 helped. That was a game changer completely, getting those guys to help.
And was this the first crisis the family had to deal with?
Not at all. I mean, over 900 years, there's a lot of stuff happening in the world. So it's not, but just in the last century, World War I was a crisis. As I mentioned, we lost all our investments in industry. We lost some of our land in places. Then there was the Austrian Revolution that changed a lot for us. And that was followed by World War II, where we lost our land in the Czech Republic. My other family, like where my grandfather comes from, we lost everything, and now Poland was all taken away. And then in the 70s, there were a few big storms in Europe, so we had a crisis to a lot of our forest was damaged. We had just recovered by the 70s from the damage from our estates being managed for 10 years by the Russians. So when we got our estates back, half of our forest land was harvested and the timber was gone. So those winds, and then in the 90s, Austria had an inflationary period, so that was a challenge. In the 2000s, we had some of our land was designated a national park, so we had a big law case with the Austrian government about the compensation of that. And so it wasn't the first time really, but still we didn't really have risk management or crisis management set up as something that we would be doing.
There's Simon here is sharing with you that it was a good move not to go with the big 5. And actually, he recommends, Simon, I will share the screen and show. He recommends this book, The Big Con, which basically consultancies and outsourcers know less than they claim, cost more than they seem to, and over the long term prevent the public sector developing in-house capabilities. This is one of so interesting about the fact that maybe those who are supposedly helping you, don't know what they're doing.
Yeah, I think adding to that book, there's a reason why my family is very careful about getting outside help. We burned our fingers in the past with expensive business plans and stuff where people come up with stuff or charge you a lot for things that are not really helpful, or you have come up yourself with already. It's or we had to change lawyer during the crisis, and the second lawyer we had was very expensive, but they made a few mistakes. We sadly our not in-house, but our house lawyer who we do everything with, he didn't want to take on the case because he said, look, I'm a one-man show with 2 employees. It's too big for me. You need to go to someone else. But really, he could have probably gotten us the same results as at a tenth of the price or something. Yeah, it's not. So that's something we are careful with. And what we learned is, for example, when it comes to advisors, we now try to only work with advisors who are also family businesses, because they think similar, and they understand what's going on. So yeah.
I can tell you personally, I had an issue with the landlord at some point. We worked with a legal firm, mid-size. They were basically creating invoices out of nothing for, they were doing meetings amongst themselves, and we would charge for it, and too many people involved. And it was like unbelievable. And I as an ex-journalist, I checked a little bit and found out that actually they're suing their clients who say we're not going to pay you more than they sue for the clients, which is interesting. And we kept on fighting with the landlord for years until I took a guy who was a one-man show. He was very confident because he was a wealthy one-man show. He did real estate for his own work, and did some legal work when he felt like it. So he solved it within a month. He charged us like I don't even think I could say a tenth, but way less. And he just solved it. And at the court, they both the lawyers, also the landlord changed the lawyer, and they knew each other. They said, if only we were the ones handling the situation to begin with, we would have saved a lot of money. And it's interesting because he actually came to me and said, listen, Danny, if you want to waste money, I don't mind making money. Let's do this. But if you want me to solve it and save your money, this is what we're going to do. And I was shocked that suddenly a service provider tells you how to do things in a way that you pay him less and he's getting out of it. But I guess it's a really interesting situation because he's not there for the money. He's wealthy enough to do it because he enjoys, I guess, fighting with people from time to time. He takes his aggression there. But otherwise, it's an interesting point. So now you decided to talk about it, which means that some of your family members, if they didn't like you before, they definitely don't like you now. I mean, some people might find it very, very odd that a family member is talking about it out loud. Like you say, they told you, there's no problem. What are you talking about? This is outside. And you say, come on, who are we fooling? So first of all, how did that end up? You're starting to talk about it, and some of your family members, I'm sure, without asking, were not very, very fond of that. How did that look like?
Well, that's funny. We don't have a very good conflict culture. So how is conflict played out in my family is we don't speak about it. So far, I haven't really had a dispute about it because it's not been aired. There's definitely a point when this will come up, but that's usually festers a little bit, and then some family members actually think it's good and they support what I'm doing. But and I think there's generally a little change in my generation. People are more open to speak about this, and when people ask me why am I doing it, it's there's a couple of things. First of all, I learned a lot, and it would be a waste to just keep this to myself and go take it to the grave, as to speak. Secondly, I think it can help a lot of others. So if at least we made quite a lot of mistakes in different areas, I can help others not make these mistakes. And family businesses or business families, 90% of the world GDP is driven by families. So if you can help families be a bit more stable with how they conduct business and how they conduct within the family themselves, I think it can do a lot of good. And thirdly, speaking about is does help myself as well to process what has happened and why things have happened.
And but first of all, how many years ago all of that happened?
Well, the whole thing lasted around from 2014 to 2018. So it kind of like with the sale being concluded was last year. Not last year. The sale of the forest being concluded was in 2018, and the sale of the palace concluded last year.
And looking back, what could you have done to be better prepared, to the situation? Suddenly, 25 years old, you're in the middle of school, and suddenly this whole thing is on your, shoulders.
Well, first of all, from a family perspective, there's one thing that I think is really important, and many families don't have it on their radar properly, is it gets spoken about a bit, the different types of capital that you have as a family. And financial capital is one of them, of course, and we all know about it. But there's things like intellectual capital, social capital, human capital, and cultural capital. And there's actually many instances in history that you can lose your financial capital, but when the other types of capital are still intact in the family, you can bounce back really easily financially. The secret sauce of the family. But so my family, we focused purely on the financial part, and a lot of the other capitals took big damages due to that. Because sometimes it's a trade-off. You need to decide, okay, what's more important. And so to prepare better, how could we as a family have prepared better? First of all, do a little bit of risk management. Like if you use your main asset for an investment and you're kind of maxed out financially, you should do some risk management and prepare for possibilities of your investment going bankrupt, for example. It doesn't have to be a fraud, but what happens if that investment is gone and you have to pay up? There's preparing by financial means. What I like to say is when a suggestion I make, which we were good at as a family because my dad did it with me. So what my dad would used to do, we had this cabin in the forest, and we would go there for like a week or two, and we would live with no electricity, have to hunt our own food, wash up the plates, like really rural. And he said it's always because he grew up for the first 10 years in his life in total poverty because we lost our estates being taken over by the Russians and there was nothing. So he said it's important to know what life is like when you have nothing. And that gives you really good capabilities to tighten the belt when things get hard. But when family members don't know how they can live without having to drive, without being able to drive their Porsche every day, it gets hard to, downsize in times of crisis, which can be really important. And yeah.
No, please go ahead.
And then, prepare as a family. When times get tough, it's important that you are really solid in your relationship with each other, that you have a good trust base, that you know what resources can the family provide. Everybody in the family has skills in something. The better you know that, the better you map it, the better you can apply the collective intelligence or possibility of swarm leadership from the family. Something we lacked a bit in. We did it initially, but then it kind of broke apart. And yeah, on a personal level, I don't think I could have prepared much. This was totally out of my depth, but it does help to maintain a good routine before crisis. It becomes even more important. In crisis, the pressure goes up, the stakes get higher. You have less resources available than in good times. So it helps to, maintain a certain routine, sleeping enough when times are good, and stay rigorous with it throughout the crisis. I neglected personal health very badly in the first 6 months, And that was a very bad idea. You lose, if you're put in a leadership position, and every family member is in a leadership position, either officially or unofficially in a crisis, you are an important resource. Your employees look to you and see how you conduct yourself. You need to be on top of your game, be able to make good decisions. If you neglect yourself, you will screw up at some point. And there is little, you need to be not scared of making mistakes in a crisis, but you can't make too big mistakes, otherwise it's done. So that's the paradox that you need to have in mind and be prepared for, really.
And so I have two questions about that, or maybe thoughts. One, the issues that wealthy families deal with in regards to others, because I think to some extent in human nature there is problems. You see people. I think my uncle never spoke with my grandpa, and they didn't remember why. At some point, somebody asked my grandpa, "Why don't you guys speak?" Well, once he did. I don't know. They didn't even know, and they didn't speak to one another. And I remember reading one day, of course, an extreme thing in the news of two brothers that one stabbed the other over a fight over an apartment in some city that maybe is worth $150,000. And then I thought, what? It sometimes doesn't matter how much is on stake, right? It could be something stupid, but people have that, brothers fighting over legacies. I met families that wouldn't speak to one another. I met lawyers that explained to me the biggest thing we do when we solve issues with families is I bring the psychologist with me, and their job is to look at all this mess and try to untie and understand that her daughter once said something to that father, and since then they hate one another, and we need to resolve that. Otherwise, there's no deal. Forget the deal. It's way above the deal. It's hatred. That's poison, and that poison comes from way back, from something nobody even remembers anymore. So you need to untie that. So I'm trying to think. How much is it in? I mean, I guess wealthy families have just more at stake, but also more reasons to fight over, in a way. I mean, when you have a big family and several managers, and the wife of this brother tells him, you should be a leader, you shouldn't be a VP, you should be the CEO, and the other guy, the husband tells his wife, you should be the CEO, and they drive the brothers into fighting with one another. So I guess in a way, I'm trying to figure out how much is it the human beings as problematic creatures versus the issues that wealthy families deal with. And how do you see that?
Yeah,
I don't know what I asked here, but it sounded.
No, I think I got it. Don't worry. So yeah, it comes down to the relationships and the family culture. If you look at it from developmental psychology, the first 7 years of a child's life are really important. So in the year 1, you form something called basic trust. And for that, you need to have a lot of closeness and interaction with your parents. And then the next 2 years, you form also better family connections, and you start to get an understanding of behavior. And then from year 3 to year 4, that's where you form your understanding of social norms and how to behave. And and how do children learn? You copy what you see. Yeah. So, and that's why this goes on for generations. So, and there's this, I forgot the name of the study, but Malcolm Gladwell, for example, cites it in one of his books. If you look at high income and very low income families, the problems are similar and they have the same amount of problems, because for different reasons, financial income becomes the focus of the parents. So in low income families, it's because they need the money to survive. So parents work 2 jobs, they're just not there for the kids. And in high income families, like wealthy families, the family business is important, the investments, the asset. So what happens? The parents aren't present enough in the child's upbringing. Wealthy families outsource it. You have a nanny. I essentially grew up with my nanny being my mother. I saw my nanny much more than I would see my mom and I would spend more time with my nanny's husband than with my own father. So for me, on an emotional level, my parents are not my parents, if that makes sense. They're your biological parents, but on an emotional level, they're not. So you think so the trust is damaged between family members due to the upbringing. And there's all these other things that, especially when siblings come into play, oh, you always were the favorite son. No, you always were the favorite son. Yeah, but dad would come to your football games. He wouldn't come to mine. Stupid things like that. But they aren't stupid. They're just really, you would define it, I think, in psychology as a kind of like secondary trauma kind of things where you've been hurt emotionally, and when it comes, it is then carried out on the financial field. In succession, you see this all the time. That's where they carry out this other dispute that is there but not being spoken about. And it's not about the money. It's not about the flat, or it's not about this and that. It's really about other things, more emotional things from the past. That's at least to the point that I came with speaking to people, going through therapy, other family members, and reading books on this. I think it's childhood is really a crucial time, and the way you behave in the family. And people always think that school is the only way to educate, and doing technical things is to educate. But what makes a lot of business people successful in life is they have empathy, they can show compassion, they know how to negotiate well. For example, interest negotiations. I don't do deals with anybody who starts screaming in a business meeting, for example. I walk out, I was like, okay, that's not what I want to work with. So the whole topic of emotional education is kind of overlooked, in my opinion. And you end up with these, next generations who are either, you call them trust babies, who are totally lost, or you have these other people who have other emotional issues, and it's just this pressure cooker that is being created with the absence of pressure or too much pressure. Yeah, I could ramble on for hours. I'm sorry if I'm
No,
speaking
it's
too long.
fascinating. It's fascinating. I'm trying to think if the world has changed or not. Look, my wife is from Finland, and the Nordic countries. You finish work. I mean, everybody are at home at 4. I remember when we did institutional conference, we tried to reach out to the pension fund managers, the guys who run billions. 3:30, they're on the way home to be with their kids and family. So there's a very specific culture. And I remember one of her friends, her father had a big company, and she told me he never spent time with us. And you saw the rage, you saw the hurt. I told her, yeah, but you know what? But your father, and I'm not talking about families, I'm talking about families that built their business. I mean, he built the business. He built the business, and that's demanding. Thanks to him, you have all that luxury that allows you to be a teacher and your husband to do, I don't know, whatever, because you guys have that security that your father, had to work hard for. And she said, well, you know what? If it was up to me, I didn't need that money.
No.
I would have wanted my father around more than the money. And she took it so bad that she went to become a teacher, and she didn't even want to let him see that she enjoys the wealth they have. She couldn't care about it. And that's a very strong thing. And when I speak to people that build businesses, like many families that are still there, Larry Silverstein and many others that build businesses, Sam Zell, that passed away, they would explain to you that, listen, you got to sacrifice, you got to give it all to you. I spoke with so many entrepreneurs I asked them, were you there for your kids? And because my wife, I'm a workaholic as well. And my wife would always be like, no, you stop and now you be with the kids. And I'm like, come on, we got competition that doesn't stop and look at the kids. But she makes me. And I'm wondering, one, are we in a different era now where many parents, the new age, you work from home, you suddenly start to invest in yourself, you exercise, you live healthy, you're saying enough is enough, I'm not going to sit in front of a screen after 4. Do you think that entrepreneurs can create businesses even while saying enough is enough, or you got to sacrifice to get there? And do you now, like my wife's friend, you say to yourself, I will never be like my parents. When I have kids, I will be there for them, because nothing in the world is worth that.
Yeah. So there's a couple of points that I think, from my opinion and my experience, I would add there is, on your last one, you also, so there's no one fits all solution to this. Especially when I look at it, I did a lot of work around this topic with my parents, and I've come to the conclusion that it was better the way it was, because I don't think my parents, from the way they already grew up, and if they didn't do the work that it was required to do, because also in their generation, psychologists, therapists, that was something icky you wouldn't touch, if you did that, you're weak and it's not interesting. So it was better for me to have nannies and go to boarding school, for me personally. It takes a lot of work to realize this and accept it. But yeah, I would like to do it differently when I have kids. I don't have kids yet, but I want to be there for them in the amount that would be good for their development and the future. And it also makes financial sense. So who do you think is the best at destroying your legacy later on, if they really want to? Your kids that you give it to. So it's better to be there from them and make a little less money, but invest in your kids who will take this over and who can then add to your legacy instead of hating it. I used to hate my family's legacy. I was like, this is horrible. What the fuck is all of this? Sorry for my language. And it took me time to realize, okay, it's something good. It has good points and bad points, and you can play more to its strength and use the opportunities. Then look at the other side. And if you juggle it well, it's also not just better for your kids, but I mean, you're a dad, spending time with your kids, watching them grow up and develop and how they are doing, that's something enriching, isn't it? Also for you on a soul and mind level. And that gives you the break you need to recharge and make better decisions. And it forces you to work more effectively. You can say no. Many entrepreneurs say yes too much to useless projects that in the end you think to yourself, instead of doing this, I could have gone home to my kids. Why did I do this? So it forces you to make better decisions. That's what I think. And it saves you the money that is later on spent on lawyers and therapists to fix things that you neglected early on. So that's my take on that. I think.
And you think the new age, the new kind of generation, do you think they are saying, we're not doing that?
I think a lot. I see a lot of my peers who are saying, okay, I'm going to do this differently. Of course, things like what we're doing right now, video calls, they help because you can work from home more and juggle around the schedule of your kids, for example. I see that a few of my friends are doing that. They're there more for their kids because it's more flexible. And I think we're in an age where we know more about psychology. We know more about the consequences of what happens if you don't do certain things. And if you don't know what damage is done by not being there for your kids, it's not important because you don't realize how damaging it can be. But if you understand that it's not good, you make decisions differently. It's like in business, depending on the information you have, you make different decisions.
And do you think that culture, that at the end of the day, the core issues within families and family businesses are the same in different cultures? I mean, when you look at Europe, when you look at the Americans, different upbringings, different society. If you look at the UAE, it's a completely different ballgame with very strong rules that only the male can take over. In some cases, in some countries, I remember a consultant saying, we didn't even know how to solve that. But how much do you think it's a culture, changes the circumstances, and how much do you think is, at the end of the day, when you dig in, it's the same old song and dance, just in a different
I think it's the same on the deep level. It's the same because human psychology on a broad scale is very, very similar in different regions, but the problems have a different shape and a different color to it, if that's what you could say. And they develop in different ways. Yeah, Asia has a more collectivist culture in general than Europe or the US, where the US has a highly individual culture. The problems are different, but at the core, it comes down to the same issue. That's what I think, at least. And I'm not, I have not the experience to say I work with a family there or with there, and I can compare it well. But just from what I see in my peers and what they complain about and how things are handled, I think it's, for example, most of the most businesses worldwide who are older than 200 years come from Japan. And they will only always select one inheritor, the most competent one. And if the next generation isn't competent enough, then they what's it called? They adopt someone who they think is competent enough and give the family business to this guy or woman. So that's a totally different culture. Yes, the family businesses survived for a long time, but it's very different to what we are now seeing in European countries, where you can't do that because it's legally not allowed. And I don't want to imagine what it's like when you have your two siblings. There's three of you, for example, and you, from your young age on, you're having a fight about who is going to get the business and who is more competent. Sometimes I would, when people look at aristocracy back in the day, where you would poison your brother or stab your mother or whatever to get it's not surprising if that's one winner takes all kind of mindset.
Octavian, it's been very fascinating. I mean, we are way past our hour because it's been a very truthful and transparent look into issues that are very, very deep and troublesome to so many people. And you're looking at it, bravely and talking about it and sharing. And I don't know if you see the remarks from people around the place, but if I'll just read some of them to you, one is just wow, and the other is brilliant insight into child and emotional development. And this is just a part of them. I had to deal with many other remarks here just to focus on the question. So I wanted to say, before I let you, add a couple of words, to say that, it's been fascinating that you'll be speaking at our upcoming London conference, which I think is November 22nd. Yes. Before I'll say goodbye until then, I will say that for us, this is now just before the storm, where we basically are in the middle of the summer, and right after all hell is breaking loose. September 12th, we start our first conference after the summer in Chicago. Then we got New York. We got in October, New York, Calgary, Montreal. Then in November, we got Los Angeles, London, and then December and Tel Aviv. And December, we got the Pre-Art Basel conference that is always fun. So, and I'm not even talking about the online sessions and the dinners we have in between. So I hope we'll survive that, but we're excited about it. So so I wanted really to thank you for this and to mention that we'll be hearing more from you at the conference itself. And if there's anything else you'd like to add, please do. I know now you help other families with the experience that you had. Anything else you'd like to add at this point?
Oh, well, just in general, I have a blog. You put my name in, you can find it. I do write a few longer pieces and just stuff that comes to mind every day. And yeah, always happy to have a conversation. I'm always interested to learn more and see more, and if I can help others. So just yeah, I think that and one last thing for the family members listening, I always like to say it, just adding on to, you're not only like an owner of wealth or a CEO, you're also a family member, a father, a mother, maybe grandfather, a brother. Both things are important. My final message.
Thank you so much, Octavian. When you're in New York, please let me know so we can meet, grab something in person. And we'll definitely see you in November in London. And it's great that people like you talk about it. And I will actually share this video with Carol Levin-Bernick, who's a very brave woman who sold her business for $4 billion to Unilever. She spoke at our Chicago conference. She's speaking again now. And she shares the issues that they had, which are unheard of, and that helps many others. So thank you so much. Enjoy this summer. Here crazy weather in Europe. I hear in Italy, Israel, things are going crazy a little bit.
We have so far had it good. It's nice and cold at the castle, so I just go to the cellar.
And I definitely need to visit you in the castle. I'm a fan.
Anytime.
That I'll definitely do. I see my wife is on the call, so she's probably making notes now on our next trip.
Don't come in the winter though. We have no heating there, so
definitely. So thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to seeing you. And thank you everybody for joining us.
Thank you.
See you later.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.